thing that made the biggest difference was seeing the closed ones, was seeing
Mm.
that line go up for the people that committed to the program versus the people that weren't so committed. Their lines were not going up as significantly. And that's a visual that's very hard to argue with.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Revenue Problem Solvers podcast, where we look to crack the code in growing your business by tackling the challenges that keep revenue leaders up at night. I'm Carl Ortmans, and on today's episode, we're going to dive into one of my favorite topics that's near and dear to my heart, and that's the topic of sales enablement. Today's podcast is sponsored by the great team at Virtual Causeway. Imagine your sales team spending less time chasing and more time closing because your buyers already know who you are before that first call. Well, that's exactly what Virtual Causeway does. They help B2B companies get found earlier in the buying process by the right people through the right channels that actually influence decisions today. What's the result? Well, it's fewer cold calls, better conversations, and pipeline that moves faster. You can check them out at virtualcauseway.com, and don't forget to mention the show for a special rate. Now, most sales training programs have a little bit of a dirty secret. The industry average completion rate is somewhere between 30 and 40%. That means that the majority of reps actually never finish what you've built for them. Now, my guest today will tell us a little bit different. And my guest today is Eve Kedar. Sorry, my apologies. It's Dr. Eve Kedar. And she would tell you that it's not a content problem, it's a community problem. Eve is a sales enablement consultant, author, and community builder based out of California. And her background, well, it's not exactly what you would expect from a sales enablement leader. She came up through education and social work, not in sales. And that's exactly why she sees things most go-to-market leaders miss. She spent years inside companies like Gainsight, Seagate, and Copy AI, building at the learning systems that actually move numbers, not just filling seats. And at Seagate, her systems selling academy hit over 80% completion and tied directly to a 20% lift in sales growth. She's also the author of Build a Kickass Sales Team and Build a Kickass Online Community. And today, Eve runs EK Consulting, where she helps funded software companies get their reps executing consistently so they hit their number. Eve, welcome to the podcast, and thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure to be here, Carl. Thank you so much for having me. Looking forward to our conversation.
Me too. It's I told Eve when we were chatting, I'm like, oh, it's so we met so long ago, and that was at the very first Sales Enablement Society conference, and it was in Texas of all places, and that's how we got to meet each other. And I think we had an exercise where we actually had to like growl like a lion at each other. And so anyways, it's nice to be able to catch up and hear something. So I've been looking forward to the conversation.
Me too.
But as we get kicked off, can you share with the audience a little bit about your world? What industries or verticals do you work in? What are your selling motions? What size companies do you work with?
Sure. So I've been in Silicon Valley for most of my professional career here. And so I started off at, the big companies here in the Valley, PayPal and Cisco, and of course, Apple. And I had a great time. I really wanted to know what was behind the curtain. It was truly curiosity that drove where I took my next job, right? And I learned from each one of them, the discipline, what alignment really meant. And the years that I spent at Gainsight and Seagate really educated me about the value of global alignment. For what we were talking about, Seagate's a global company, and they have salespeople spread across the entire globe, and they each have their own culture and their own way of dealing with people. And Seagate really wanted them to get the culture of Seagate more than they were getting their local perspective. So that was the challenge and the fun of working there, and that's where I learned a lot. So I've been in sales enablement quite a while. It was called learning and development. It was called training, and now it's became sales enablement. Now it's being called revenue activation. Go to market, but it's generally about uplifting sales teams that have great strengths but are maybe missing on the execution, and that's where I find my sweet spot and my interest in helping people transform from being just meh, and then becoming like owners of their patch and being excited about what they're doing. Yeah.
It's awesome. And because ultimately you're the coach of coaches, right? You're seeing everything from a different perspective and helping get there, which is awesome. How we got to today's topic is Eve and I had a really nice conversation, and I asked the question, just like I ask everybody, what's a successful revenue initiative you led or an existing challenge that you're solving today? And we did have a really fun, and it was, I don't want to say, the conversation was very fluid, and we got to all of a sudden the topic of the podcast, and it was really clear that we had to talk about how you built peer coaching into a sales enablement program, not just as an afterthought, but as the whole engine. And if we could start here, you built the system selling academy, which actually it doesn't roll off my tongue very well, but you built the system selling academy at Seagate, even more challenging for me, and hit 80% completion in an industry where, like we said, 35% is normal. What is it that you saw or that you did that most people didn't see or they didn't do so your team was more successful?
So first of all, about the naming, I just called it S3, Seagate Selling,
Oh,
System.
that's way
So,
easier for me.
so it made it easier for all of us. So what was great, I think, about what we rolled out was that we had the leaders' belief in us, that they were behind us. They were also very insistent that there be accountability. And we had to give reports every week to leadership and senior leadership. So the teams knew that their behavior was getting reported on every single week, with a chart, with colors, who finished what they were supposed to be doing. And that really encouraged them to start playing off against each other. There was a competition between the teams who was going to get the highest number. And then we offered, we offered gifts to those that finished. So because it's global, it's really hard. You can't send Amazon gift cards to everywhere on the planet. So it was a point system, and it was, people really cared. They wanted their stickers. People will do anything for stickers, I've found. And they wanted to show that their team was, performing better. So that was one thing. But what really made the difference in the peer coaching is that they saw that it worked. It really uplifted each of the teams, and they got to more closed wins and to better conversations. And as soon as that momentum started, it carried through because they got energized about seeing, wow, this is really helping me. And they saw that their peers were willing to give up a little bit of their competitive edge, like hiding their secrets of how they were winning, to make their whole team win more. And that was the real value, right? So that worked well. So the winning person on their team showed them exactly how they're using the slides, what visuals they're using at what point of the conversation. And they practiced helping each other have better open-ended questions, how to dive deeper, because they were used to selling, maybe a commodity, right? A hard drive, a box. And we were trying to take them on this journey of becoming consultative sellers. And it wasn't easy, but we moved them along, and they saw that they were winning more. So it's really hard to argue with that.
When you started at Seagate, what was the infrastructure that was in place when you started, and what did you take over and realized, there's a better way, I know how to do this?
Yeah, so there was quite a bit of content. I didn't develop the content, and there was an extraordinarily complex and well-designed product. So, and there were great product engineers that could talk to the team and tell them what they'd built. But really, it wasn't a consultative selling motion. There was no process that was global. There was very local processes. There was no clear next step. And they went out to close quota by selling a certain amount of a certain kind of hard drive in that instance, right? And they weren't really engaging with the customers to find out what were the problems. So what we did is we mapped a lot of use cases. So if they heard keywords for their use case, they could come and see the directory and then pick out the use case that was going to apply to this customer, ask a few more questions, and then make some recommendations that would fit that specific example. So it was becoming more of this listening to the pain points of the customer. What problem were they really trying to solve? Not what problem you thought they were trying to solve, but listen to them and let them, have that whole tell me more. when they gave an answer and it was a short answer. Can you tell me more about XYZ? Can you tell me more about, so they heard it. And then once they had that language that they understood, there's some keywords here that we've been told apply to these use cases, they could then start offering the product or the server that was applicable to that specific use case. So it was a more complex motion. They had to listen, they had to map to the use cases, but that's what we developed. We developed the directive. The content was there. It was just we needed to segment it a little bit more in a more sophisticated way. And it worked well.
So how did you diagnose that? When you walked in, did you look at it and say, we actually don't have a standardized sales methodology, and that's the very first thing? Or did you look at it and say, well, you know what? I'm hearing from the conversations that this person sells like this person sells like that. They're not connected. Or did you did you do a bunch of ride-alongs? Like, how did you start to diagnose where to even focus?
Yeah, so that's the intriguing part. You really become like an investigator. You don't know what's not going as well as you want it to go, but you're gonna figure it out. I don't know how many of you watch shows about mysteries on TV, but it's a lot of fun to try to figure out and follow the clues, right? So we knew that they weren't closing the way we wanted them to. The numbers weren't showing up well on the leaderboards, right? And the dashboards were disappointing. So the first thing I did was talk to the sales leaders and ask them what they thought was going on. Okay, that was one conversation level. And then I talked to the reps and asked them where they thought things were going well and where they thought that they were strong in what they were doing and what they thought the gaps were, right? You want to work from strengths usually. So you want to be sure that your attitude towards the sales rep is understanding how difficult their job is, right? The pressures they're under, the no's that they're listening to, the language that they're hearing. And then you also want to talk to, in my opinion, the product engineers and the solution engineers. You want to understand deeply the language of what you are selling, right? You want to come into the conversation fairly well informed that you're not just parachuting in and like, oh, I have a solution for you. No, you want to like learn what's going on. Okay, so then you get a picture from the rep's perspective, from listening to their conversations, definitely ride-alongs. They're not easy to get. But once you start developing relationships, which is what I tell everyone's about sales, it's all about the relationships. You create relationships with solutions engineers and with the sales reps, you're going to get a clearer picture of what's missing. And what was missing was this alignment. So alignment's not about content. They could all get the same PowerPoints from marketing but alignment's about the behaviors. Like, are they having these open-ended conversations? Are they diving deeper? Are they asking the question behind the question? Are they finding out really what the company is trying to solve that they're talking to? And now it's even more complicated because both the companies they're talking to and themselves, they're being given these AI tools, right? And they're told you have to use them. And if you don't use them, someone else is going to use them and they're going to take over your job. So there's a lot of anxiety about the different tool sets also. So you want to be smart about that. You want to limit the tools. You want to edit and take away anything that's not helping them sell, even though it sounds good, take it away, right? Do an audit and remove things that are wasting people's times. Limit the meetings. Only have ones that make sense, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, it sounds good, but you really have to do it. You have to take away the tools that are wasting their time, that are making them feel less confident. And then you want to take the sales reps that are doing well, and you're always going to find them, doing well, and then figure out what it is that they're doing differently than the others and get them to share, right? Because you're giving them props. You're building up their confidence. You're saying, wow, you're a real leader. You're doing this so much better. Can you teach your peers? And it's a promotion of sorts. Maybe it doesn't come necessarily with money at first, but it will show up as bonuses and other ways. So you get them to want to teach their teams what it is that they're doing differently. And it seems to work. Like people really wanted to learn these things. They wanted to become better, and they were starting to self-correct. You didn't need to coach them. The managers didn't need to interfere that much because the peers were helping each other, and you could see the momentum was building. So that it's good when it does that.
I agree. And the peer coaching is something that, as if you go back to the old playbook, right? And I'll say the old playbook. If you've ever read John McMahon's book, Qualified Sales Leader, or if there's a whole bunch of enablement books that are out there. But anyways, the notion here is, I join a new company, and what's the first thing? The old way is, well, just go sit with Eve and just do everything that Eve does. Okay, well, as maybe even I have different personalities. Maybe you're more outgoing and I'm more of an introvert. Well, I can't do what Eve does because Eve is doing it in a different way, and that's not me. So that old way is sort of like kind of gone now, and we've now moved into this new way of AI and the way of coaching, etc. Did you find, or are you even finding now with the teams that you work with, that they're much more open to doing that peer coaching, that peer recognition, because it's not the old ways of, I'm not telling you anything because I'm competitive and I don't want you to learn any of my own secret sauce?
I'm not sure that that's changed so much.
Really?
Yeah, I think they've gotten maybe a little bit more sophisticated about how they hide what they're doing, but I think that building the community and showing them that they can help each other succeed more rapidly than hiding their methodologies is more advantageous. And that's where the value of sharing openly works. But that has to come from leadership. I think that salespeople are extraordinarily competitive, and they do want to hold on to their secret sauce, Carl. They don't want to share unless it's really proven that it's going to help. And that's our job, is to prove to them that it's going to help. So we bring them examples, and then it's like you have a champion within the company, right, that you're selling to. You need a champion in-house that's going to help you with sales enablement. Someone that buys into what you're doing. Once you get that person and they can spread the goodness, that really helps. But again, based on relationships. Same with building a relationship with a champion at a target company. You have to build relationships within the company that you're working at as the enabler. And then when you create these communities of peer coaching, like whether it's on Teams, that you have a group on Teams, or whether you have a Slack team, or whether you have an actual community, right? Gainsight builds communities, and Circle.so and Mighty Networks. There are a lot of community solutions out there. It magnifies the message. It magnifies the speed at which they can transfer information, right? So if it's internal and it's on something like Teams, then there's usually security that works better for the company and keeps the information internal. And they get a question right away. Like if they're at a customer conversation, they got an answer that they're like, what's that answer about? They can type it in while they're talking and get some support from someone who's available. And once they see that happening, it's like magic, that type of alignment and those gifts that they give each other, and it lifts everyone. It builds excellence. And that's what you want. You want the teams to be seen as centers of excellence for selling.
I really like you call the center of excellence, because I truly do think that's a great way of looking at it. How do we create this center of excellence across our teams? If we go back, because I think one thing that I didn't ask you, and I probably should, and maybe some other people are thinking this too, is when you walked into Seagate, what is it that you inherited and what did you see? So maybe a little bit of like question under the question stuff is, did you walk into an enablement team that was already doing some stuff? Was it brand new? Was sales enablement reporting into sales, into marketing, into somebody else? Like, what was the environment you walked into to try to diagnose and create that alignment like you were talking about?
So what's interesting in the companies that I walked into before, like Apple or PayPal, they were very organized and very disciplined on how sales and marketing talk to each other. And the alignment was very clear. When I walked into Seagate, there was a lot of reorganization and organization changes. And that happened fairly consistently throughout my entire years there. And I was lucky enough to report to a manager that understood the benefit of alignment. And he started building from all this was fairly chaotic content into a system. And I always thought I should have a tattoo, a line now. And that was his message, that you couldn't all go off on your own. You had to have an alignment between sales and marketing. And he would have these very large meetings with everyone having a voice there that would end up in a funnel that people knew what the motion was, and that we were going to get from this fairly chaotic environment into something that was far more streamlined, that people knew what the next step was. But it was a fairly rough environment at first. Like, the content was well developed and the visuals were well developed. That was functioning well. But the idea that the different continents were going to actually work in the same direction and have the same perception about consultative selling more than just selling a commodity, that took some persuasion and some time. I would say that was a difficult point there, that because first of all, some people felt like they were giving up territory, like by giving up to the overarching umbrella of everyone should be aligned. But once they saw that the dashboards were going up and that you could really see the results, there was no arguing with it anymore. People got on board. But that moment that we had to get to that place, it wasn't that much fun. But we got there.
So what did that journey look like? Like, if we can kind of like go diagnose it, because I can already hear.
I can't take credit for a lot of it because management really understood it had to be an overarching movement. And it looked like a lot of conversations across a lot of time zones that were challenging, right? Because, Singapore and Ireland and, Europe and it was challenging. And even across the US, right? We've got all these time zones here. It's not, so people had to stay up late and get up early to manage these conversations. And some people are not at their best at those times of day or evening. But I think that there was a lot of goodwill. People wanted overall for this to be a success story. And a little bit of success builds more success. People want to be on the team that's winning, right? I mean, that's what sales is about, being on the winning team. And that's what we leveraged. We leveraged the fact that if you stuck with us, if you managed to turn your blisters into calluses, that you're going to be on the winning team. And a lot of it was analogies. When you start running and the sprint and the marathon, and you have to practice every day, and it worked. People listened and people got encouraged. And also we gave individuals a lot more freedom to show their leadership, which they didn't have before. As long as they were willing to buy into the overall system, if they were willing to lead their peers in the peer coaching, they had a lot more freedom to do that and to show who they were to a larger team. And when we had company-wide meetings, we always promoted those people. We always highlighted them, and it worked. People like being recognized, and people like winning, and they like getting stock options, and they like getting bonuses. So that's what we did.
Yeah, it's great.
We sold it inside. Like, we used selling methodology inside the company to promote our sales team, right? We also asked them the questions. We asked open-ended questions. What's going to make you perform better? What's going to work for you? Do you need it in your time zone? Or is it better for you? So we did the same type of open-ended questions and listening and finding out what was going to work. And we pivoted. That was another thing, Carl. If we made a mistake on how we were doing something, and it showed up right away, right? We didn't wait for accountability. Was every week those reports went out. We made mistakes, so we pivoted, and we taught them that also. We modeled pivoting. We modeled, like, in the conversation, if you made a mistake, own it, change it, keep going. And so I think that also helped.
Interesting.
And also, those coffee cards helped.
The coffee card, yes, yeah. Typically, caffeine helps salespeople stay pretty focused. There's a few things you've said in that little bit here. The one thing that I have to ask, and I wrote down, is KPI focus. So when you started to do all of this, was there a focus from the across the management team to say, hey, Eve, you know what? we need to improve our, is it win rate? Is it average deal size? Is it our time to ramp? Is it our time to the first deal? Like what was that metric that you first started to look at and say, okay, that's going to be our North Star and we're going to work towards it?
So, there's the funnel that goes up and there's the funnel that comes down. And so I really wanted to see engagement. For me, I wanted to see them completing the exercises. I wanted to see them showing up at the peer meetings. That was something I was tracking and reporting on because I knew that was a metric that was going to matter to me. The leadership wanted to see that there was more pipeline, that there was more calls going out, that there was more, lead generation, that there was more deeper follow-up conversations, and that there were more closed wins. So we were reporting on slightly different KPIs, right? But at the end, the KPIs of the company decide everything, right? If you need to have a pipeline, if you need to have a quota, you don't want the lagging metrics though in your program. You need to go after the leading KPIs and the signals. And so my feeling was if they're going to the trainings and their managers are attending the trainings and leadership is watching the reports, I'm going to get my KPIs fulfilled. And the feeling was that the training was mapping to the KPIs of the company because that's how they were set up. So it was bottom up and top down concurrently. It was intense when we first set it up. There was a lot, like any program, right? When you start anything, when you start a community, it requires a lot more energy and a lot more hand holding and a lot more attention. And then when the momentum builds, it proves itself and people want to join and people want to get, they want the certification. We certified people. We gave them stickers. We gave them titles, it's certified level 1, certified level, and it works. It worked.
Yeah, I agree. And I like how you said that the nice thing is that you were mapping the KPIs of what you were focusing with the sales team or with the sales leaders to the company KPIs, because then at that point you could always, I'm not always, but I'm guessing you had an ability to push back and say, hey, by the way, here's how we get there. Now, and I have to ask you the question of how to get there. How did you get the team there to say, by the way, you need to show up to these trainings, and it's not just for me, it's for the company's best interest?
Well, that's what I'm saying. I can't take responsibility for that. Leadership was very aware of this program. They wanted it to succeed, and they gave the message very clearly from senior leadership to the managers to the teams themselves. So it has to be an alignment issue on that level, that they were all engaged and that the reports went out weekly, that they saw who was committed, what teams were really making progress. And then the thing that made the biggest difference was seeing the closed ones, was seeing that line go up for the people that committed to the program versus the people that weren't so committed. Their lines were not going up as significantly. And that's a visual that's very hard to argue with, right? As soon as they saw that, it was powerful. And that's why I kind of insisted on setting up the dashboards early on. It's like, why do you need another Salesforce dashboard? I said, I need it. We have to have it. We have to be able to show this. This is going to matter. And so that was a bit of, it was a bit of like, because it's a resource request to get those dashboards set up. Now it's, of course, much easier. But at the time, it was an ask. But I was glad I did that. I was glad I insisted on that because it made a difference in how the achievements were recognized. And it was very clear that they had an impact. So
That's great. One of the things that's ringing in my ears right now, and I've got a chance to speak to lots of sales enablement leaders, is this one. Okay, we're gonna roll. Here's the situation. I walk into a new company, I do my due diligence, I do my assessment, I put together what I think is going to be the feedback, and then I say, we're gonna roll this out. And then I go to set it up and I got pushback from people, and it's pushback from people in certain roles. When you rolled this out, did you get pushback from high achievers? Did you get pushback from the average performers, the bottom performers? Who did you get pushback from, if you did, and why?
It's a really good question. So at different times, I got pushback from different people, right? At the beginning, of course, the pushback was from the high achievers because they didn't want to give up their secret sauce, as they said, but we convinced them that it was going to be worth their while, and it turned out to be true. We also got pushback because people hate doing role play. That has never changed in my entire career. People hate it, but it works. So I think today a lot more people are creating content, right? They're doing these videos, they're doing YouTubes, and as a salesperson, they're showing themselves off, they're highlighting themselves, and they found out on their own that role playing and practicing is going to make a difference in their outcome. So it's a lot easier now to convince them because all you have to do is talk about that, right? But people hate being really paid attention to at a certain level. Like that's why they don't necessarily like their calls being recorded, because it's going to flag who talked more. Did you bring up the keywords? Did you follow did you ask open? People don't like it. It's training and sales enablement often expose things that people prefer not to expose. It exposes the sales process. It exposes marketing. It exposes the alignment between sales and marketing. So I always felt that sales enablement is a delicate dance between proving that what we're doing is worthwhile and the pain we create while we're doing it. So you have to move carefully, because if you move too enthusiastically, like, oh, this is going to be great, you're going to alienate everybody and you're not going to make it happen. What was really kind of wonderful at Seagate was the buy-in from senior management, and they opened the tent and they showed that they were interested in this being a success story. And I had a manager that believed in the magic of alignment. So that made all the difference. And it hadn't happened at other places that I was at. There was not usually this level of care and attention to a program. And I think that I was very lucky and I benefited from it and I learned a lot from it. So, yeah.
Was that a culture difference, or what was it? Was it a personnel difference? Was it a belief difference? Like, what was it that was different joining Seagate?
It was magic. I don't
Magic.
know. Voodoo. I think it was a lucky conglomeration of people that really cared about the product that they were doing, really felt that it would solve a need, and people that were fairly brilliant actually at what they were doing at the time. There's been a lot of changes over, every company goes through right sizing and reorgs and riffs, and it's not pleasurable, but some of the people that I worked with were outstanding at the time, and it was a good moment.
Interesting. I find it funny and sort of fascinating. I'll say it this way. Eve and I had a good chat about certain things, but that whole notion of role playing in sales, like sales is the profession that as soon as you talk about training or making yourself better, they push back. Yet we have, things that people watch all the time, sports, and athletes train more than they actually play. And that is one of the things that it's just so backwards. In sales, we're going to play more than we practice. Okay, hold on a second. You want to go into a game unprepared against a competitor or an opponent or somebody that you have no idea about. Wouldn't you rather be prepared for that? And I mean, the opponent in this example is going to be the customer. I'm going to go into a customer call and I'm going to wing it. Great. Guess what happens if you lose them? If you don't do well, you might lose them forever and you'll never get them back. And I think it's interesting. And actually part of the reason I built Reps is because of that role play. You can't always get somebody, but you have to do it, but you can't make time for it. And the other person's busy. And so that's one of the things that I built, because I firmly believe in role plays, just like in any sport. If you're trying to get better at a skill, you have to do it frequently, right? Like focus and frequency drive outcomes.
1,000%. That is so accurate. That's very accurate, Carl. I totally agree with you. And it's interesting, right? I mean, we all experienced reps that would far rather do push-ups and pull-ups than role plays for their calls. I think, though, it might be interesting now with AI. You can role play with AI, not with a person, but with your AI companion. And I'd like to see if that lowers the anxiety and lets people practice more frequently, because they don't have to expose themselves to a coworker or show their vulnerabilities or show where their gaps are. They can just have this relationship with a computer that can build them up. So it might actually help. I don't know. We'll see.
And I don't know how many well, you've coached many more teams than I have, so I'll say it this way. But I've had some of my best sellers on my teams in the past have been introverts. And by the end of the day, they're like, look, my social battery, it's empty. Like, just leave me alone. But you have to learn that about them. So having something like AI, like a tool like we're talking about, is being able to go, all right, I've got 10 minutes and I need to prep for this call. I click the button and I go into my role play and I go through it and I carry on and whatever. By the end of it, I'm like, okay, I got a good handle. I didn't have to waste any emotional or social capital to just to try to
Exactly.
get myself there. I can do it in the time where I'm needed. And we're remote now. And that makes it even more challenging.
Yeah,
So
no.
it's definitely a different world that's changed. And then so the other thing you said that I don't want to miss, you talked about pivoting. So when you deploy something, it sounds like you said you're good at pivoting into something new. Was there a way that how did you measure that, or how did you monitor? Was it a metric? Was it an engagement? How did you know, oh, you know what? That's not exactly what I wanted. It's actually this, so I'm going to change it. How did you monitor that to measure it?
So I think the word iteration probably is better than
Ah,
thinking
okay.
pivot, I think. But you're refining, you're constantly refining, right? You're listening to the conversations, you're seeing where, oh, we need to cover that topic more on relationships, or we need to cover this topic more on challenges, or we need to cover this topic. They're not asking open-ended questions. They've gone back under stress. They've reverted to just telling them what they need to buy. And it's like, no. Okay, so first you have to recognize you're under stress when that starts happening in the conversation. So we had to pause and iterate that conversation. And then we have to like really explain why the open-ended questions is going to give you something so valuable that you don't want to skip over it. So it's more iterating than possibly pivoting.
Mm,
Unless your company has changed the product, right? If there's a new product out there, that's a pivot. Okay, but it's a pivot along the same lines that you were doing. So you're not changing the way you're selling, you're still being consultative, but you are changing the use case and the
mm,
keywords that you're listing for this new product, right? Because with AI, there's a lot more data loads and there's a lot more pressure on the saving all of this data while the conversations are happening. So they have to learn a new language. They have to learn some new visuals. They have to learn the new product. So that you have to iterate and you have to pivot sometimes. But
yeah.
iteration is gentler, and I think it's probably better received.
Yeah. And and even for the clarification, the reason I ask you is pivot is like, did you go down a path and say, oh, you know what? Wrong methodology or wrong ICP or wrong delivery. We're going to pivot to a different way.
Okay,
Like
so
that's how
so
I
there
was.
you go. I have a good example, I think, for that. So with the team that was in Asia, we were trying to teach them this content, and I didn't speak any of the local languages, and it really wasn't working out because they were not being very verbal in explaining to me what the problem was. Like what I was just getting quiet, which is never good on a training call or one of these things. But they were being polite to me, which was nice, but it still didn't help me. So then I had to think about this and I brought in someone that knew the local language and it changed everything.
Hmm.
We started teaching in their local language. They felt a lot more comfortable and it was much better. And that was unfortunate that I didn't think about that from the beginning, right? Like so you have to take your ego out of this and you can't drive everything yourself and you have to see what's going to apply. Again, like consultative selling. You have to find the language of the person that you're dealing with. And this was very clearly the language of the person that was engaged. And it changed drastically the engagement from that geographical region in the program.
And it's interesting you picked that out because there's this notion. I don't know how much you even brought into this or thought about it. Maybe you did afterwards, but the high context versus low context societies and how different they are. And being a high context society, the Asian cultures are very high context. So you being somebody that's a leader, they're going to respect you and they will make sure that but and that's their culture in the high context versus us in North America. We're traditionally a low context society, and so we can do a little bit different delivery, and we're comfortable with that pushback. Did that ever come into play as you
Yes,
started?
that was
Yeah.
part of how we pivoted, actually, when we realized that we had skipped over that very essential piece of information, and we made assumptions that were inaccurate for that geo area. Like, come on, we should have paid attention to this, but we are now. So,
Yeah.
took a
And
moment.
and it's probably a great lesson for them too, because you went to say, you know what, I made a mistake, I missed. I'm going to correct it, and here's how I'm going to correct it. And so maybe there was something there that if you were able to, quote unquote, fall on the sword as an example, say, hey, I
Yeah.
messed up. I want you all to be comfortable with making these mistakes with us internally, because you know what? It's how we get better.
Right. And that is the conversation that we had. And then that's how the follow through came to be far more successful than the initial attempt. So yeah, so that was a good that's a good example of that.
That's awesome. And so, how can you give us maybe just one nugget? Because I just looked at the time. I told you to get you out of here within an hour, and I think we could easily blow through that. When you looked at the enablement when you first joined, did Seagate tell you, hey Eve, by the way, we've run sales enablement programs before, and our completion rate is, I'll just for sake of round up, because the stat was 35%. We're actually only getting 35% of the people actually completing it. And we're struggling, and we're seeing our opportunity close rate. We're seeing some downward metrics. We need to change it. Was there a metric that was in place for you to say, okay, we're going to shift here, and this is how we're going to do it? And you said, here's the game plan. What did that look like?
So again, I have to say I had competitive leadership. They wanted to shift everything. They wanted to, and I am selectively deaf. Like when you tell me that yeah, I'm not going to listen to that there's 30. No, we're going to go for a very high number. What are you talking about? I won't even listen to that. So there's that. And then I am competitive. I wanted this program to be a success story, and I was going to take what people said to me very seriously and do what I could to engage. And I was all about engagement. I really feel like I set up this methodology, SCID. It's in the book. I don't want to go into it and bore people, but engagement was a really high value for me, and I was going to change that. So I think being selectively deaf to certain factors, like, so what if it was like that? We're going to change it. It's going to be great. And you just, you go along there and you figure it out.
And is that where, because I think one of your methodologies is SEAL, right? SEAL. Is that the strategic and engaging, actionable, and legit? Is that the
Yeah.
four?
Well, so the legit, so SEAL's a little tongue in cheek, because a lot of the sales enablement people come from military backgrounds, and they're like the one thing and all this. And I was, Navy SEALs. So I came up with my SEAL that I guided the Monterey Bay Aquarium on alternate Saturdays for, over 8 years now. And that was a little bit tongue in cheek. Because of that, because I wanted to move away from the military discipline and to have it as a consultative opening, right? And so I do think it has to be specific, it has to be engaging, has to be interactive, and you have to design well. That's my SEID. And it evolved at Seagate, and it did start with this SEAL. Thank you for remembering that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're very loud, the SEALs. I don't know if you've heard them, but so it was partially that also. You want to have a program that's loud, that grabs attention, but that is well designed, and it's going to create engagement and interaction.
Yeah,
So,
that's
yeah.
great. If we were to now, because we could continue to go, Eve, and I like I said, I don't want to keep you longer than you can. There's something that I'd like to ask everybody in the conversation, and it's this: everybody likes new, and nobody likes different. And doing both at the same time is exactly what it sounds like you're doing with Seagate. Either way, but for when you're doing both at the same time, it can either cause friction or uncertainty. So for somebody who's listening to this podcast and they're thinking about leveling up their enablement programs, their enablement function, how can they, like, what are 2 or 3 actionable things that you would say, hey, by the way, take a look at these 2 or 3 things, or do these 2 or 3 things, and it'll actually put you on the path? What are those 2 or 3 things that you would suggest for them to do on Monday morning?
So what I think is it's really interesting to listen to a real conversation. If you have something that's recording the conversations, like Gong or something similar, I would recommend listening to those conversations and seeing how well they map to the sales process. How far are they going rogue? Or how far are they actually following what you expect them to follow? Or did it follow to a certain point, and then the sales rep felt the pressure and went back to doing it the way that you don't want them doing it anymore? So I would say listen to those conversations and then actually engage with that rep or that team and say, I heard this. You don't have to call the sales rep out, but I heard this in a conversation, and this is what we want you to do differently.
Mhm.
So I would take that action. And another idea is, you know how you have a sales win like every week or every 2 weeks, you dissect it? I think dissecting a sales loss is also important.
Mhm.
Not to make the rep feel badly, but what the team can learn from it is sometimes really important. And, yeah. And then I think relationship building inside your company with marketing, with sales, with leadership, with product marketing, with pre-sales, post-sales, all the things that are happening. Relationship building is so essential to your health as a sales enablement leader. And
Mhm.
doing sales enablement really matters. Like, know that you're stepping on people's blisters and figure out a way to make it slightly more comfortable for everybody involved. And truly, the alignment is in the actions. So, yeah.
Yeah. I like it. And I do like that you said the sales loss, because I truly believe that's one of the things that I've implemented in the companies I've worked with. And I call it war rooms. It's a little bit, but we start with a loss. You learn the most in a loss. If you're just constantly winning, you're like, oh well, what can you learn? But the loss, I love that you started there. And you called that out. Eve, if somebody wants to continue to learn from you or kind of follow you or talk to you, where would you suggest that they connect with you or follow you?
Absolutely. Find me on LinkedIn and find me at ekconsulting.io. And I'm happy to do an audit and I'm happy to continue the conversation. Carl, it's been a total pleasure. So thank you so much for having me.
Oh, the honor's all mine. It's been so much fun. And like I said at the beginning, even I haven't spoken in years. And one little LinkedIn message sparked this conversation. We had a great chat and we got into the podcast, and I learned a lot from you about enablement at the Sales Enablement Society conference. I continue to follow you and continue to learn from you. And even today, I've got an entire page of notes. I actually can't write anything more on my page. So thank you for today. Thank you for everything you've been doing. And I appreciate your friendship over these last years.
Of course. Thank you.
That's going to wrap up another episode of the Revenue Problem Solvers. I obviously want to thank Eve for sharing these invaluable insights. There's some strategy you can put into action today. Remember, the success leaves clues, and every revenue problem has a solution. Sometimes you just need the right conversation to find it. Until next time, it's Carl with the Revenue Problem Solvers, helping you turn your obstacles into opportunities. Thank you for investing your time with us today. We'll see you in the next episode.